Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
With a continued passion for public television, we are proud to underwrite Informed Sources.
Please join us in supporting WYES television.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. In one of the most shocking developments linked to the ongoing investigation of alleged sexual abuse by some clergy, there was this week an on-camera acknowledgment of past transgressions by a Catholic priest. We'll be talking about that, as well as controversy over the Blue Cross insurance sale, accountability problems at the Orleans Parish coroner's office, one retailer's vision for Canal Street, and the latest on the state elections. And if the mayor invites you to a slumber party, make sure it is not in the Pontalba apartments, because now you may have to split the costs. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Stephanie Riegel, staff writer, The Times-Picayune, The New Orleans Advocate. Ben Myers, staff writer, The Times-Picayune, The New Orleans Advocate. And David Hammer, investigative reporter, WWL-TV, Channel 4. David, we're going to go over to you, because you had a very interesting interview this week with an accused sexual abuser priest, and I'm going to let you go on and tell the story and how it happened.
Okay, well, you know, I've had to interview way too many accused pedophiles in my career, Marcia, but, and you know, I've had the door slammed in my face, I've had people hang up on me, I've had them tell me, absolutely not, I didn't do it, but this is the first time that anybody has ever said, yes, I did it. So let's go ahead and roll a clip, I believe we have.
We do.
Hecker has given several interviews since 2018, when the Archdiocese put him on a list of 57 credibly accused sexual abusers. But he never admitted it publicly until we confronted him with his own words. You say in here, for instance, that one of the people was willing, but he was a 15-year-old boy. Do you feel that a 15-year-old boy can be willing to have sex with an adult, particularly a priest?
Right now, no. Definitely not.
But why would that be different then than it is now?
The way I see it now, I definitely understand, and I certainly would not do it now. But at the time, like I say, it was a sexual revolution, and people were saying, oh, look, we were bound all these years, all these centuries, you know, now we're free, and I fell for that.
Asked him if you directly asked him if he had committed these deeds, and he said yes?
Yes, I asked him about 3 specific cases where he said that he committed overtly sexual acts in a letter that was written to church officials in 1999. I showed him the letter, and he said yes, that he did do those things. And you hear him there in the clip say that, you know, it was the sexual revolution and we were free. He's talking about in the late 60s and 70s when he was in his 40s and these kids were 14, 15, 16, and he's saying we were free to do these things that we had been bound for centuries against doing. And I pointed out in the story immediately, no, that it's not true. You were not free. Adults were not free to have sex with teenagers then, as they are not free to do so now. It is illegal.
And so this is the first public admission to this?
Yes, and he has done, as I said in the clip there, he's done some interviews. Kimberly Kurth at Fox 8 had gone to talk to him several years ago when first there were some initial things, and Aubrey Killian at Channel 6 had asked him all those times he had said, no comment or no, I didn't do it. But Ramon Vargas at The Guardian, who used to be at the Times-Picayune and teamed with me on my Losing Faith series, actually got that document from 1999. And when we had that, and he shared that with us as his partners. I said, let's go over there and talk to him, because I know he wants to talk, and he has shown an inclination to talk before. And this time we had the goods, we had his admission, his confession, and he didn't try to avoid it this time. He said, yes, I did it.
David, that particular shot where, first of all, he's standing behind grill work. It reminds me of somebody going to confession. It was like a priest going to confession to you. I mean, you think that was in his heart, or was he just so?
Well, he is 91 years old, and I do think that, and we were talking about this before the show about the 2017 movie Spotlight that features the Boston Globe's efforts and how they exposed the scandal there in Boston. And there was a scene where a reporter goes to the door of an accused priest and asks him, and he wants to talk, and then his sister, I believe it is, pulls him away. A lot of these folks, I think, do want to talk, but Hecker's admission is really important because he still potentially faces criminal charges. The DA of Orleans Parish, Jason Williams, was able to subpoena documents related to his case just recently. And so, admitting this can have actual criminal implications for him, essentially admitting a crime. So we'll see what happens with that.
So how did this interview come about, David? I mean, did you call him and set it up, or what happened there?
I went over to the apartment and called him from outside the apartment, told him I had the document, which Ramon Vargas got through Sources. And it's a sealed document that's not public, but it was part of the church files. And I told him on the phone, we have this document, and we'd like to talk to you, and we're outside of your apartment. And we know you've talked about this before, but we'd like you to come out and talk about this specific document in your confession. And he told me to hold on a second. I was on hold for a little bit, and then he appeared. So he clearly, he understood what I was there to talk to him about, and he came out on his own volition.
Any response at all from the Archdiocese about this?
The Archdiocese has said before and reiterated that they have been, cooperating with the criminal investigation, that they turned over information to the police several times on allegations against Hecker. I think the concern is, though, that in 1988, he spoke to Archbishop Hannon. In 1999, he made this written confession that went to Archbishop Schulte. Both times, he was put back in ministry, and he was allowed to retire with full benefits in 2002. It was not disclosed publicly until 2018, when Archbishop Amon, the current archbishop, put out their list of credibly accused, that he was a credibly accused clergyman. Up to that point, it had not been publicly disclosed. And then they continued to pay him his retirement benefits until 2020, when the bankruptcy court ordered the church to stop paying them. So the kind of slow roll of the acknowledgement of this, and the fact that when they wrote a letter to the police in 2002 about allegations against Hecker, they only shared one of them. They did not share in that letter that he had admitted several cases.
How many victims?
There were 7 that he named in this 1999 letter. We also asked him about another victim who makes an allegation that would be a crime that could still be punishable today. He denied that allegation about raping somebody.
So the DA is now investigating this?
That's correct.
Okay. All right, David. Thanks a lot. Yeah. Ben, let's go on over to you, because council made a decision on that very infamous apartment over at the Pontalba.
It's certainly become infamous, and this appears to be the end of a year-long saga that started when WVUE published surveillance video from a publicly owned camera of the mayor's goings in and out of the city-owned apartment in the Pontalba building. The council a few weeks ago decided to return the apartment to complex with an ordinance, to Commerce with an ordinance. The mayor immediately said she would veto, and she did veto. And there was a vote yesterday to override the veto.
And so now, what's the next step? I mean, the apartment going back into Commerce was something that the Inspector General had recommended.
That's right. The Inspector General, in a couple letters, said that this potentially violates the state constitution against gratuitous donations, and urged for the apartment just to be rented out on market. It could generate upwards of $40,000 a year in revenue.
So essentially, mayors in the past have used this apartment for what, basically?
You know, we'll never really know everything that's gone on in that apartment, but typically the standard line is that it's supposed to be used for, first of all, things that would advance an interest of the city. So hosting dignitaries, having maybe carnival gatherings with important people. You know, it's certainly a perk of office. I don't think anyone would really argue that, but the idea was that it would be for the mayor to use responsibly in ways that actually furthers the interest of the city. The mayor says that her use of the apartment is completely in line with everyone else's before her, and all this criticism is just a personal attack on her.
And her response to the overriding of the veto?
Her response to the overriding of the veto is just that, that everyone is, you know, all of her critics on this just have a personal vendetta against her. So, yeah.
But bottom line is now that apartment is going into commerce.
It's done. The locks are supposed to be changed, and according to the ordinance. So we'll see.
And there's a wait list, right, for those apartments?
There's a waiting list, and that's how they rent it out.
So somebody might be getting a call soon.
But there's never been any evidence of overnight use. I mean, having a party or something is one thing, but I think of the long-term use that she had for it. Is that what makes this different?
Yeah. So I guess, I don't, there's no evidence that I know of overnight use prior to this, but, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Well, and what is the fact now is that it's going back into commerce.
That's right.
Okay.
If they want to have a cocktail party right down the block is the Cabildo. Okay, they got that great space with a great view. It'd be a better place anyway.
All righty. Okay. Pontalba, not the cities anymore. Well, at any rate, for the mayor to use, not a perk anymore.
That's right.
I should say.
That's right.
All right. All right. Thanks a lot, Ben. Okay, Stephanie, over to you. You were going to try to explain to us what's happening with Blue Cross Louisiana, Blue Cross Blue Shield, potential sale, but...
Yeah, it's encountering a lot of pushback. This deal was announced originally back in January that this very large national for-profit publicly traded company, used to be known as Anthem, now does business under the name of Elevance, but it's akin to like Aetna and Cigna, it's one of the biggies, was going to acquire the local Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Louisiana, which insures almost half of the state's population in some form or fashion. There are like 1.9 million people that have some sort of Blue Cross insurance card in their wallet. And so nobody really paid it much mind for a while. It's kind of like, yeah, insurance deal, snooze. And then as the regulatory approval process got near, and that was supposed to have happened this past week, I started hearing, and not just I, but other people started hearing from policyholders, from the local insurance broker community, the guys that sell policies to small and medium-sized businesses, also a couple of whistleblowers that really watch these kind of deals around the country, and they said there are a lot of big red flags around this deal.
Why?
Well, for a couple of reasons. It's not the fact that we're selling the company to a big national for-profit company. Of course, that raises questions about whether it's really in the best interest of the state's policyholders, whether rates are going to go up, whether a for-profit company that has to answer to shareholders and has to make money, right, to return to its investors, will have the same sort of outlook and even have the same sort of underwriting standards and procedures that have been really relatively favorable to our smaller and medium-sized businesses.
And Blue Cross is not for profit.
Blue Cross is a non-profit. It does make money that it holds as a surplus. It doesn't redistribute them to shareholders. So, I mean, there are those kind of concerns, but the bigger concern, I think, is about the way that the Blue Cross board has proposed using the sale proceeds. And this is a $2.5 billion sale, and Blue Cross has proposed taking that money and kicking in $1 billion or so from its own surpluses, all right, and giving about $300 million of it back to its policyholders, and I'll get to that in a minute, and putting the rest into this very large nonprofit social welfare foundation that a group of Blue Cross board members are going to control. Now, there are 92,000 policyholders, and that is defined as the people, whether it's an individual or a company owner that actually paid for a Blue Cross policy through the indemnity company. And to be a policyholder, you had to have had that policy between January of 2023, when the deal was announced, and this December. But a policyholder is not necessarily the same thing as the 1.9 million people that I referenced a minute ago. If you're an employee of a company and your employer provides health care benefits to you, the employer is the policyholder, not you, Marcia, right? If you're in the Blue Cross HMO, that doesn't count. You're not a policyholder. If you work for the state and you're insured by the Office of Group Benefits and you have Blue Cross and you're not a policyholder.
So those folks would not be entitled to the money nor to vote, because there's a vote also.
Correct. So it's a question not only of how you define the policyholders, but also how they determined that policyholders would only be getting about 10% of the proceeds versus the rest of this money that's going to go into a foundation, which in theory sounds very good. And all of the big foundations and philanthropists in Louisiana and beyond have said, oh, this is wonderful. This foundation is going to solve all our health equity problems. We're a poor state. We have poor health outcomes. It's going to be wonderful to have so much money dedicated to solving these problems. But how? Who's going to decide, right? And they haven't been able to set up that structure yet, and they can't really answer those questions. And so for those reasons, as well as just the concerns about what it could do to rates,
right,
people have started to ask the Department of Insurance and other regulators to slow the approval process and put the deal on hold for now.
But is it true that for-profit entities mean higher rates?
Not necessarily. And the argument that the Blue Cross folks and Elevance, Anthem, have used is that because we're bigger, we can spread the risk around, we have more tools in our toolbox, we can actually provide lower rates, and in some cases they might be able to. There are just a lot of questions that nobody's been able to really satisfactorily answer. Bigger doesn't always mean better, but bigger doesn't necessarily mean better. It just kind of depends.
And our insurance commissioner now, Donnellan,
yes.
He has said that he wants to have this taken, off his plate, as it were, before he leaves office, which is
correct.
The end of the year.
Correct.
So will this be answered before then?
Well, I think it probably will be. There were supposed to be hearings scheduled for this past week, Monday and Tuesday. They have now been put off 45 days at the request of Blue Cross because so many questions came up, and there was a big public hearing that some state legislators held because they were hearing from constituents. So they held a meeting last week, and after that meeting it was really clear that there's a lot of discomfort and a lot of legitimate questions that need to be answered before this deal can be approved. So Donnellan, at Blue Cross's request, has put it off 45 days. Now, he still has to have a hearing and approve it. The policyholders also have to approve it. And the first thing they have to approve is to reorganize this nonprofit Blue Shield into a for-profit company. But that's effectively the same thing as a vote to sell it.
And ballots had been sent out, but now they're not going to count those ballots.
Ballots had been sent out to the policyholders, like a proxy kind of thing, like you would get if you were a shareholder of a publicly traded company. Those are now going to be ripped up, and they're going to start the process over.
Okay. All righty. We'll see how this all moves along. Thanks a lot, Steph. E, over to you. Politics you want to talk about.
Yeah, poll came out this week. Now, there are a lot of polls that come out during the campaign. This one seems like one you can trust. Okay, first of all, the pollster was Ron Fauché, who's a respected pollster. It's paid for by a consortium of TV stations around the country, around the state, including WWL in New Orleans and The Advocate and the Public Affairs Research group. So people you can trust are behind this thing. Okay? So here was and it polled 800 voters. This was the result of the last week. No surprise in terms of the original order. Jeff Landry is still way out ahead. Sean Wilson is second, and everybody else is way, way below. Now, the thing to notice, and we may see this in more elections, and we saw this 8 years ago, where we had a field that was all Republicans except for one Democrat. In the case of 8 years ago, the one Democrat was John Bell Edwards. So being the one Democrat, he got the plurality, the votes, the Democrat votes, and that got him into a runoff. That seems to be the thing with Sean Wilson this time. The problem is it's going to always be hard for that one Democrat to win if all the other Republicans gang up. In the case of 8 years ago, John Bell Edwards, first of all, he had some name recognition. He was a legislator. His family was sheriffs. They were well-known in Pontalba Parish. And plus his opponent was David Vitter, who had all these sexual charges that he was dealing with. And so Edwards got into a runoff with the one Republican he could beat, and that's what would happen. And this time, anybody who gets into a runoff I think Sean Wilson's going to have a difficult time, and it looks like he's going to be the one in the runoff. So the real question becomes, if for some reason Wilson's campaign falters, he doesn't have the name recognition that John Bel Edwards had. He was the transportation secretary for the state, had a very, very good reputation, but doesn't have the name recognition. Truth is, none of these people have much name recognition to begin with.
But it's also a question of whether he gets into the runoff, because if you have 36 for Landry and 14 don't know, and 2 somebody else, he could top 50% if he, you know, gets a get out the vote effort.
And Landry by far leads with campaign contributions. And there tends to be, in elections, sort of like this last minute gravitation towards who the voters think are more likely to do better. And so the way it's going, I think there's a possibility that more votes could shift in favor of Landry.
Okay, still a little while to go. All righty, thanks a lot. Ben, let's start with you on this discussion regarding the Orleans Parish Coroner's Office. A couple of families very upset about what happened there.
Yeah, there's been a couple of troubling instances that have come to light recently with trouble with identifying overdose victims. In one case, the person was identified, their name was spelled wrong. One letter was transposed, and the family had been, they're from DeRidder, they had been looking for their son for months, occasionally calling the coroner's office and asking if they had him, and they were were told, no, we don't have him. Somehow this error was discovered 8 months afterwards, and this person, the victim, had been cremated by that time, and this family had a family plot where they bury their members. They don't believe in cremation.
Just heartbreaking. And then we heard of a second instance also.
Yes, and David can discuss this as well. We did the story together.
Well, we teamed up. We heard from another person. This was another case with a young man, or well, you know, a man in his 40s who overdosed. His name was Justin Smith, and his father, Sidney Smith, who owns a tour company in the French Quarter, and Justin was known as an artist in the Quarter, and he had some mental illness and had struggled with drugs, and he disappeared. And you know, the father went to the coroner's office and needed to get an order to have him committed to a mental institution or to the hospital, and they gave it to him, and he was already there in their office. He was already dead by that point. And he continued to use, there looked like there was credit card usage, and so he thought he was still alive. That went on for a month, and it turned out that they apparently didn't do fingerprinting or didn't get the fingerprints done or analyzed, and they failed to keep his body maintained, because there was a cooler issue where the cooler had failed, and his body had decomposed beyond recognition by the time the father.
And so the coroner's office, how do they explain this?
They said that they had a cooler that was on the fritz for a couple of months, and they tried to get it fixed, and they haven't been able to. And they're saying that, they wouldn't address the specifics of this case. When we asked about it, NOPD says they never requested fingerprinting. We do know that there was an issue with the unit that reviews fingerprints at NOPD was displaced for a time, which could have factored in here. But it's just a basic service here for the coroner's office to identify bodies and to maintain them while they're being held at the morgue, and they're not doing it in these cases.
Wow. Okay, well, we'll see how that continues. All right, thanks a lot, guys. We're going to wrap up with you, staff. And you interviewed a businessman who has a renowned clothing shop on Canal Street, and sort of what his vision is for the street.
Right. I talked to David Rubenstein last week for our Talking Business Weekly Q&A column, and it was really great to hear someone who is so optimistic and continues to be bullish on the future and the present of Canal Street, once the city's fabled great, retail corridor. And all through the 70s and 80s and 90s and today, as the other big department stores closed up and the other retailers left, they stayed. And David and his brother have really been very passionate advocates and effective advocates for cleaning up the street, for keeping it clean, and for like keeping the faith, really, I would say, more than anything. So among the things we talked about was the strength of his business, who his upscale clientele is, and also what's going on right now in their building on the 2nd and 3rd floor. He's partnering with developer Joe Yeager, who's building a boutique hotel in there. It's going to be like a 44-room hotel called the Rubenstein Hotel.
So is he seeing locals coming, you know, a lot of locals still shopping with him? And what about locals coming to the street?
Because he was talking about how robust their business is, and, you know, people are coming, and I said, but really they're not locals. And he said, well, you know, we don't see a lot of locals downtown. This is true. And in fact, he sort of chided locals for bragging about not wanting to shop downtown and how that's sort of a chic thing to say. But he did say we see a lot of out-of-town people who not only visit here, but who have second homes here and who come here regularly, regular out-of-town visitors, and that a lot of these people are now his customer base. You know, there's a small segment of people that still dress up, but he said they cater to those upscale, you know, middle to upper and upper people who want to dress up professional menswear or just spiffy going out
and
for the evening kind of thing.
Reminds me of the old riverboat days when people who lived up river had money, they go to New Orleans to shop. You know,
right, there you go.
So.
Hotel opens when?
Well, he had said August, the end of August, but I think it's going to be a little bit more like September maybe.
But it is progressing along.
It is progressing. I saw work going on there over the weekend, last weekend.
All right, very good. Other stories, E, over to you.
Well, the heat's having a big impact on Louisiana agriculture. There was a story out this week that the cattle herds are in trouble because with the lack of water and all the heat, there's not much of a hay crop, and they're not able to feed their cattle. And so what I think is going to happen is that a lot of the ranchers are going to sell their calves, are going to wean them early so they can sell them, and then try to sell their herds early so they won't have that responsibility with the hay. So one problem caused by the heat that we don't see, but it's very real to some people.
Absolutely, and the drought also. Staff, over to you.
We were talking about residential real estate prices one of the last times I was on this show, and we went back and looked at some of those numbers to see which areas were doing actually well, sort of bucking the trend of slumping prices. And downtown and the French Quarter are strong, so I have a report coming out this weekend that looks at some of the factors behind that.
Okay, very good. Ben?
We are currently waiting for an imminent federal court judgment that could end up tanking the new short-term rental rules that the City Council rushed to create. We'll see.
Okay, we're getting whiplash trying to figure out what that is.
Yeah.
David, over to you.
And Tuesday is a big anniversary for hurricanes, Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Ida, and that's the second anniversary, which means it's the deadline for insurance claims to be filed for Hurricane Ida, so that's a big one.
Important to note. All right, guys, thanks so much. Great conversation. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
With a continued passion for public television, we are proud to underwrite Informed Sources.
Please join us in supporting WYES television.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.